What gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer? There is no more.
You may remember back in chapter 1, we saw that a lot of people call Philippians the Epistle of Joy, and there's good reason for that. But we thought it might be wiser to change it to the Epistle of Emotion, because there's a lot of emotion in this letter. Then in chapter 3, verse 1, Paul says, "Finally, my brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord." So it looks as if he's going to end his epistle on the note of joy after all. By the way, that word finally, when you're sitting listening to a sermon, isn't that sometimes the best word in the sermon? Finally. At last this is going to end. The great Methodist preacher William Sangster wrote a book on preaching for his students, in which he said, when you say finally, then end. Don't go on for another 15 minutes. In his lovely plum English accent, he said, "Such false intimations of hope border on the sinful." By the way, he also said, if they're paying your salary, they have the right to hope that your sermons will be at least vaguely interesting. Well, Paul says finally, and then he doesn't end. He goes on for another 2 chapters. No one knows why, but he was about to end the letter, and then he felt, no, I've got to add in a whole chapter on another subject. And this chapter could in no way be called joy. If anything, it should be labeled anger. Look at some of the words he uses. Watch out, dogs, evildoers, mutilators of the flesh. Their destiny is destruction. Their God is their belly. Their glory is in their shame. He's very angry about something. What is it? Well, the clue lies in the word circumcision used in verse 2. What has happened is that so-called Christians who are Jews have infiltrated into Paul's precious Gentile churches and started to corrupt them with the teaching that don't listen to Paul. If you want to be a Christian, you've got to obey the Jewish laws as well, starting with the law of circumcision. In other words, if you want to be a Christian, you've got to become a Jew. And so they're introducing legalism into the Christian faith, and so corrupting the gospel of its greatest gift, that we don't have to try to please God. It's been given to us as a gift through Jesus Christ. Don't add laws. Now, Paul had been that route. He said, if anyone had reason to boast in the confidence of the flesh, it's me. Now, confidence in the flesh means that I can get God's approval by my own strength. And Paul lists 7 qualities that he had that should qualify him for God. I think the most remarkable of them is the last one, regarding the law faultless. Now, I don't know how many rabbinic laws there were at the time of Paul, but I do know that now an Orthodox Jew is required to keep 613 laws. And to be able to say, I've done that faultlessly, is a tremendous achievement. But Paul says, I won't boast in it. In fact, I count it all as skabala. Now, you can hear in that word the scorn of that word. It's actually a dirty word. I wouldn't use it in English. Suffice to say, Paul is saying all this legalism should be flushed down the toilet. Resist it with everything you've got. Now, legalism is an insidious thing. It creeps up on us unawares. One day I was playing golf and I had to get across a fairly easy pond onto the green, and my ball went way in the end and landed in the middle of the pond. And one of the group said, we can see who didn't have a quiet time this morning. Now there it is in a frivolous way. If you have a quiet time, if you're good, God will be kind to you. If you're bad, God will punish you. There it is. It comes in more serious ways when people have 2 or 3 really nasty things happen to them. It's not long before they're prone to say, God must be punishing me. There's the legalism. The whole book of Job is about that in fact bad things can happen to very good people. Horatio Stafford, who famously wrote the hymn, It Is Well With My Soul, he lost all 4 of his daughters in a shipping disaster. And then he and his wife had 3 more children, and their only son died of scarlet fever. He was an elder in the Presbyterian Church in Chicago, and a whispering campaign began around the church that he must have some secret sin for God to be punishing him like this. It was so painful to him that he left not only the church, he left Chicago, he left America, never to come back again, and set up an American colony in Jerusalem based on grace. And they did wonderful good work in the early days of the 20th century in Jerusalem. But legalism is a plague. But the nice thing about chapter 3 is Paul doesn't dwell in his anger. He rather turns his energies to what he exalts in and what he enjoys. And above all, it is having righteousness of my own that comes from faith in Christ. Notice the personalness of that. I have got righteousness, and I haven't had to earn it. It comes through the blood of Christ. And that he exalts in above all else. That's what we should protect. That's what Martin Luther was protecting. He saw all of the rules being imposed by the church at the time. And then he read the book of Romans, and he saw that it's a gift, we don't earn it. And so they brought him to the diet of worms and threatened him. I think I could be rather threatened by a diet of worms. But he said, I cannot recant. Here I stand, I can do no other. I must protect the grace of Christ. And then Paul says, instead of spend my energy on trying, I'm going to give my effort to knowing Christ better. Better and better, right to the end of my life. Even I want to know what it means to fellowship in his suffering. God has given us the wonderful gift of being able to know him. The great difference between Christianity and all other religions is that all other religions give you laws or ways or things you can do to please God, to appease God, to reach nirvana or whatever it is. Christianity offers all that as a gift, and in its place he gives us the capacity for relationship. Relationship, not religion. We can know God. Let me tell you a story from the years of dramatic acting. Who do you think that is? Perhaps a young Laurence Olivier? Well, no, actually, it's a young Andrew Luke. I took part in drama at school with a Jewish friend called Leo. Leo had a wicked sense of humor and a real gift of comic acting. We won the one-act play festival, I think largely because of his comic acting. Then we left school. I lost touch with him for 50 years. And then at our 50th anniversary, Leo sat next to me. I noticed some changes. I noticed he was wearing a yarmulke. I noticed that when our food arrived, he didn't get it. He got his own kosher food. He'd become an Orthodox Jew. And as we talked, he told me that after he left school, he went into business, became very successful. But then he became an alcoholic, and then he became a drug addict on top of that. He lost everything, his wife, his children, his home, his money, his job. He was literally in the gutter. But a rabbi in Johannesburg paid for him to go to Canada to meet with a rabbi there who specialized in these things. And through that man, he was saved from all of his addiction. And when I met him, he said, I'm now the world president of Narcotics Anonymous. We must be very careful not to put people in boxes. I said to him a little later, do you feel you have a personal relationship with God? And he looked at me and he said, absolutely. I wouldn't be here tonight if I didn't. An Orthodox Jew who had a relationship with Yahweh. How much more can we know Christ? And so, how can I sum up the message of chapter 3 in one sentence? I think it would be this. Reject legalism, earning your way into God's favor like the plague it is. Don't spend energy on that. Rather, put your effort into knowing Christ better. Well, in chapter 4, he's going to say, finally again. And maybe he will end with rejoice after all.